Bourbon's very much one of those things that you can do it for 20 years and think you know everything, but there's always different corners to go or peek around and learn more about the grains, or we were talking about the white oak of the barrels.
Yep.
You can really go as deep as you want.
All right, y'all, I am sitting here at Rabbit Hole with Matt Gandolfo, and you are the master whiskey taster for Pernod Ricard.
Yep.
Which is an amazing job. I mean, that's what we get to do. That's what I get to do all day.
Yes. Everyone's their own personal master whiskey taster at home.
I was going to say, I can think of quite a few people who want to be you when they grow up. So not a bad title. What exactly does that mean? How do you get that type of role at a company like this?
Yeah, that's probably the number one question I get when people hear that title. And honestly, for me personally, it's come from a career of passion and continuously want to be a student of the industry. Bourbon's very much one of those things that you can do it for 20 years and think you know everything, but there's always different corners to go or peek around and learn more about the grains, or we were talking about the white oak of the barrels.
Yep.
You can really go as deep as you want. I think where I got to my current position is through the maturation side of things. I was the barrel warehouse manager at Rabbit Hole for 2 or 3 years. Before then, I was part of the initial distilling team. So just accumulating that experience, that knowledge, and being able to work as a team is probably the main reason I'm at where I'm at right now. Because, when you're sitting around and tasting with a group of people, there's no value in having someone who's a yes man. You need to be able to speak your truth. And the more you're in a tasting sensory evaluation environment, the more you realize you can have 8 great palates in the room and everyone's picking up different details.
Right.
So just being comfortable enough to say, hey, this is what I'm getting, even if everyone else in that room is getting something different. There's value in having honest opinions. There's value in saying, hey, I don't think this is quite ready. Because for a brand like Rabbit Hole, this is more than just a whiskey brand for me. I've really, in a lot of ways, grown up and been able to reach my goals and dreams because they're the first person who gave me a chance to learn how to make whiskey.
Yeah.
So I don't want to release something in the market that I had such an impact in making unless it's exactly where we want it to be. So I think if in a lot of ways we're guardians to what we're putting out into the world. And I think we take that very serious here.
I love that. I think that's such a great way to look at it too. The market is flooded with a lot of different products right now. And to be able to truly stand on your own, it says a lot about the company that you all have built here.
Yep.
And you've been here since the beginning?
Since my first day, the distillery wasn't even completed yet. We were still very much bringing in equipment and to be a part of that whole commissioning process. What an unbelievable experience. That's how I cut my teeth operationally. And, luckily there's so many great people on that initial wave at Rabbit Hole that are still here today. So we're bonded by those experiences, which, and you look back on it and it's been 8 years now, and it has, you look back on those early days and, when you first start distilling, we're trying to work out the kinks in the still.
Right.
Right now we can distill a whole fermentation tank in 6 to 8 hours. Well, we didn't know when it was going to be done then because we were still trying to figure things out. And there were a couple of 18-hour days in there where, you got to make sure you're not wasting any of that distiller's beer.
Right.
You got to run the still out. And I think having those experiences, it made me grateful that I was exactly where I wanted to be because I started off in the marketing world. I was at Jim Beam and Wild Turkey. And, when I was at Wild Turkey, I was a national brand ambassador. So I was on the road 40 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
And I was always talking the talk. And doing that for a few years, you realize I don't want to be someone who's just a mouthpiece. I want to be someone who actually gets their hands dirty, someone who actually made their own whiskey. I'm infatuated with the idea that the barrels that I distilled 7, 8 years ago. Like, I want to make sure I get a couple of those barrels and fill those up and have that whiskey at my daughter's weddings. There's such a cultural impact being from Kentucky about making your own whiskey. And that juice I made 6, 7 years ago is on the market now. So, if you want to see someone get excited, anytime I see a bottle of Rabbit Hole in the wild, I love telling people what kind of love and passion went into that. It's not a manufacturing facility here. We want to create something special. We're not trying to copy and paste and just try to make things as financially efficient as possible. We're trying to be the next great American whiskey. And with that comes a series of intentional decisions that we've followed since the very beginning.
Yeah. And I think that you all really have done a good job setting yourself apart from the liquid standpoint, of course, but also, just your packaging. I think it's something that's become so iconic, right? We have a couple bottles in front of us, so I think it's a great time to segue into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So Rabbit Hole obviously makes a lot of people think of Alice in Wonderland, and you guys leaned into that so well.
Yeah.
So a couple of different things that you all like to do is with the art. So we were talking downstairs, and I asked you, how do you pick the artist?
Yep.
So we're going to go through that again because I thought
sure.
I loved the answer.
No, and I had to give, Kaveh Zamanian, for y'all who don't know the history of Rabbit Hole, he's the founder of Rabbit Hole. And something I've really learned from him, coming from the bourbon world, a lot of these marketing decisions were made by third-party agencies.
Right.
And when you're in these corporate environments, everything's delegated, where I've always appreciated Kaveh's ability to be super involved in the aesthetics of the brand, from the distillery design to what artwork we hang here. And of course, the labels are a big part of that. We have different varieties of bottles here. The two you're referring to are single barrel bottles. You'll see different takes on Alice in Wonderland here. So a modern take on classic characters that we work with different artists across the world, young artists that need a platform to put their own creative spin on that. So these are our most recent iteration of them. But if you go back a years past, you'll see different styles that stand out differently. It's not just Alice in Wonderland. We have Louisville landmark bottles. We do custom labels for certain states. Like Ohio had a Wright Brothers Birthplace of Aviation label last year, and we're working with one for North Carolina now. So, I think the aesthetics of the label are very much part of our story now. And it's very exciting when people come to visit our distillery. Well, the aesthetics here kind of match that. It's playful, it's fun. You don't want to take bourbon too serious, because we want to make a product that people want to celebrate with.
Absolutely.
And depending on how different people market their product, sometimes it gets like aged in brimstone and fire, and we try to take a more playful, fun approach.
Yeah.
And I think people respond to that. Anchoring the two single barrels, we have our Founders Collection, which is barrels that Kaveh acquired before the distillery opened up. So the fun finishing projects, really the two things that make us stand apart.
Bespoke and Bond is a refined venue space in the heart of downtown Bardstown. From intimate gatherings to elevated events, this is where your story starts. If you're planning your next experience, visit bespokeandbond.com for more.
So these are really kind of like the cover of the book, but you obviously want to make sure that whenever you open that, there's still a lot of really good things inside.
Absolutely.
And I think that ties into exactly what you were saying. You have so much passion for that liquid and what people are going to get when they open that bottle.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So, as you said, you've basically done every role here at the distillery. Whenever you all are first getting started, what would you say was one of the most difficult challenges you faced as a new distillery at the time? Do you think it was figuring out, the size of that you should mill? Was it figuring out how long you needed to ferment? Like what was some of the fun things that you can talk about now?
Yeah.
Almost look back and laugh at.
Oh, no, there's definitely a lot of good stories from those early days. And, coming from the marketing world and me thrusted into operations, that was a completely new environment for me. And thankfully, Kaveh was smart enough to hire Cameron Talley, who's our head of operations here, a ton of experience. And on a consulting role, a gentleman by the name of Larry Ebersol, who's a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer, he came in for the first couple of weeks to almost put us through Larry Ebersol boot camp. And that was so valuable for someone like me. But of course, when the rubber hits the road, and you're sitting there and you're operating the distillery, it's up to you to make those decisions. And
Right.
we're so lean here, it wasn't uncommon that there's only 2 people here operating the whole facility. So things did slip through the cracks. You and I have a mutual love for rye whiskey.
Yeah.
And the first rye cook that I did all on my own, rye is a whole different animal when you're cooking it. It gets gummy. It's hard to transfer. It's stickier than a traditional bourbon mash.
Mhm.
So I was so in tune to making sure that I didn't gunk everything up that I forgot to close the valve on the bottom of the fermentation tank. So I'm transferring my first rye cook over. Couldn't be more excited. A beautiful scent of licorice and spearmints coming off of it. I'm so happy with it. And I realized this tank's not getting any more full. And I looked down on the floor and I'm just dumped out 25% of that initial rye cook on the floor. And, to Cameron Talley's credit, who was my boss at the time, he said, everyone's accredited to one mistake, but we have to learn from these mistakes.
Yeah.
So that fermentation tank is about the most rare rye whiskey tank we'll ever do. Only yielded, probably 8-9 barrels, but that's what I always look back on, and it made me realize that I'm going to double check everything from now on. So I'm glad I learned that lesson early on. I think another challenge that people don't realize is there's a lot of obstacles you have to overcome in an urban distillery.
Absolutely.
When we're backing up in a grain truck at 7 a.m. and rush hour traffic's trying to get to their job in Louisville, Kentucky, and people are honking their horns, and you have a grain truck driver who's not used to being in downtown Louisville. There's a discomfort there. There was a bunch of little challenges as far as neighbors not liking the way pumps sounded at certain times in the day, or us loading up barrel trucks. And so it's been a lesson on how can we be good neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
How can not just Louisville as a whole reap the benefits of tourism and with Rabbit Hole, but how can the neighborhood benefit from it? And I think we've done a really good job being good stewards of the New Loop neighborhood and making it a destination where people can come here and then we can filter them into the local shops and restaurants. And there's value for that, everyone.
And I mean, the space itself is stunning. Yeah. So it's a great addition from an architecture standpoint, outside and inside. And then whenever, where we're sitting in the bar right now. And there's literally just this stunning view of Louisville. So it feels like you all were meant to be here.
Yep.
And I love that too, because, going back to like what's inside that counts. Being here is such a unique experience, because you and I were talking about sometimes when you're on the Bourbon Trail, there's a lot of rolling hills and horses. Yep. Here you have to stand out because it is an urban distillery.
Yes.
And I think that you all have done such a great job creating the unique visuals that you get at Rabbit Hole.
Yep.
And I loved even just talking about the process of going through the tour. You're going up all 3 levels.
Yeah.
You get to see things from different vantage points and viewpoints than a lot of the other distilleries I've been to.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about that intentionality that you all had whenever you were opening this up and building this. How does that work from the worker's standpoint? Is it fun going up the stairs in elevators all the time? Yep. And what do you guys kind of get from the guest feedback as well?
Yeah, from an operational component, you get your steps in for sure.
Yeah.
And, it's a good workout. But I think anyone who's in this business realizes that your best friend has to be the consumer. And it's one thing if you go to the liquor store and you buy a bottle of Rabbit Hole, you might enjoy that bottle, but if you come on site to our distillery and you are a part of what we do here, you get attached in a different way.
Yeah.
You buy into it. You see the people who are making the product. You go through the facility. You smell the smells. You hear the pumps. You hear what's going on around you. And you start to appreciate what's in that bottle a little bit more.
Absolutely.
So there's so much value in the experience of bourbon. And the longer I do this, the more that I see that the brands that mean the most to me are the ones that I can reiterate the stories.
Yes.
What excites me, who are the people behind that brand? And that's why the authenticity is always going to be the most important thing for us. And I think the experience is built around that. Our brand home has done an incredible job. 4 years in a row, we've been voted the best American whiskey tour in the country. And there's a reason why, because there's so much intentionality that goes into that.
And transparency.
And I think, when I first started 15 years ago, it's like no one wanted to be transparent. There was a lot of dirty secrets about contract distillation and no one wanted to divulge where they're sending their whiskey, where consumers, to their credit, they made it known, like, we're grown-ups, we can handle the truth.
Exactly.
Everyone understands the business world, and we're in this this era now where there's no reason to keep secrets, because the consumer is so locked in and intelligent about it. They're going to find out the truth. So you want to be a part of that journey with them. And I really think Rabbit Hole is a good example of that, because you don't see too many brands start from scratch like we do and release bottles at a younger age like we did. And you can debate if that was the right strategy or not, but that ties into the authenticity. So we wanted to get a product of our own juice in the bottle as quickly as possible. And the hope was, be a part of this journey with us, go down the rabbit hole with us, if you will, and try our product when we first released it at 3 years, and then come back and try it at 4 years. And now we're getting to the point where we're getting all the way up to 7-8 years. And you can see how that product has evolved through more time in the barrel. And when you're dealing with so many unique mash bills that no one's really experimented with before, it is such a risk and a roll of the dice, because you don't know how that whiskey is going to interact in the barrel. And you can make a product in Louisville, Kentucky, then go out in the country and make the exact same product with the exact same specs, and just the natural environment's going to shift everything. So, there's a risk involved in starting a distillery, no matter who it is, but to start a distillery in Kentucky, being an outsider like Cave was, really putting everything he had into it. And it's so awesome to see it pay off for everyone, and to get the recognition we're getting right now. And, Cave Hill, for example, is one of our core products. It has totally changed from a 4-year mark to where it's at as a 6, 7, 8-year-old product right now. And we still don't know what that magic number is for our products. We're constantly approaching it and saying, hey, where's the spot we need to hit the pause button? We might end up going to 10, 11, 12 years, but that's going to be a part of the ride for us and see where we want to end up.
And I think as the consumer, like, to go back to what you were saying, I love being able to go in and try it at that 4-year mark, at that 5-year mark, and really go through, because it does make me feel more connected to it. Whether or not I like it more, in my palate is happier with the 6-year versus the 4-year. I think it's something that as a consumer, we like to see brands grow, just like what you were saying, because we feel like we're kind of a part of the story. And as we go through, I have memories of, trying Rabbit Hole for the first time and being excited and then trying it in a special moment. And I think for me, bourbon is very much about the experiences that you create with it, not just in the distillery, but who you're drinking it with, who you're sharing it with, your moments where you're like, I remember finishing one whole bottle. It comes through and it plays a part in it. And when you can do that as the brand is also growing and also changing, it does. It creates this level of connection.
I think so.
So let's talk about, because there's also a connection with Louisville and Rabbit Hole. And I think Cave has done a really great job. All of the different, the core products that you guys put out have such fascinating stories, like going back to Cave Hill. Let's talk a little bit about the stories of the names for your core line.
Sure.
I think it's a great one.
I think so too. And that's one of those lessons we learned early on, where the initial idea was to have Rabbit Hole Black Label, Rabbit Hole Blue Label, which we realized people wanted to connect more than just with the color of a label.
Absolutely.
And that, almost immediately we realized we needed to brand these a little differently. And Cave Hill was our Black Label product. That name comes from Cave Hill Cemetery. Now, if you're local in Louisville, you might be familiar with, but those of y'all viewing from outside Kentucky, is a historic cemetery. A lot of Kentucky's favorite sons and daughters are buried there. Colonel Sanders, Muhammad Ali. But more appropriate to what we're talking about, a lot of those bourbon barons from the early Whiskey Row days that's their final resting place. So it very much is a tip of the hat to the history and the heritage of bourbon. And, you're from Bardstown. I grew up in Louisville. it seems like Louisville didn't lean into the bourbon heritage when I was growing up as much as Bardstown did, and when you start diving into it, there's a rich history of bourbon here in Louisville. And
really
you go
is.
down Main Street where you have operations popping back up. There's 100-year-old history of people rectifying whiskey and distilling it and having different roles in the industry. So really to play into that, High Gold is our blue label product. That comes from Christian High Gold, who was a stonemason at the turn of the 1900s, so late 1800s into the 1900s. If you're driving down River Road, there's a High Gold house, which is a facade that's still up.
Yep.
And I love that story because what we're saying before, that's a sign of craftsmanship.
Yes.
When we first started distilling here, there was a sign outside the distillery lab that said manufacturing is repetitive, but creation is personal. And that was always such a good mantra for me, because every day it can get mundane to go in and do the same thing over and over again. But seeing that, you realize it's not just about making something that's the exact same every time. It's about creating something that's special and putting your heart into it. And that's something that Christian High Gold definitely had the mindset for. Boxer Grail is our rye whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
People ask me all the time, what's your favorite thing that you all make? The Boxer Grail rye is without a doubt my favorite. We talked about how significant the 95.5 mash bill was for rye whiskey. There was a time there that 90% of the country's rye whiskey probably had that mash bill.
Yeah.
It's amazing because we use a 95.5 mash bill, and it has yielded such different results than traditional 95.5 ryes. And I've done a number of interviews about why that is. And I think it shows you how those operational decisions do shift the overall quality profile of it. For us in particular, we could probably do a better job bragging about this, but people talk about toasted barrels a lot right now.
Yes.
It's the extra step. It's a premium way to mature your whiskey. We have never not used anything but a toasted barrel.
Yeah.
We've always been toasted. And I do think it gives more depth to it. I think our rye whiskey, because of the great barrels we've gotten from Kelvin Cooperage, it yields a more herbaceousness. Mm-hmm. It's not a black pepper rye. It's more herbal. It has that anise and licorice and spearmint flavors that come out that I am thrilled about being in the maturation side of things.
And you all always toast and char, correct?
Yep, we do toast, the medium toast, and then a level 3 char. So, a consistent barrel yields different results. Boxer Grill comes from the boxing history here in Louisville, the fighting spirit that Cave had to show to get this off the ground. And then Derringer is our wheated bourbon that we finish in a sherry cask.
Yeah.
And I love hearing Cave talk about that because really that's a love story. That's a metaphor for him and his wife.
Yeah.
And he always calls her a daring ringer. And that's where Derringer came from. Basically taking something like a wheated bourbon or Cave in that instance and combining it with the sherry cask.
Yeah.
Heather, his wife, in that instance. And when you put two things that are compatible together, it's amazing how special that product can be. And Derringer has probably been the one product from the get-go that people gravitate to the most. It's a very approachable pour, but it has the depth and complexity that even if you're a seasoned bourbon drinker, you would enjoy it.
And they're fantastic.
Yep, absolutely.
Do you want to talk a little bit now about
this is the
one?
new kid on the block right here. You'll see how it ties into the rest of our core labels. Different color scheme. This is our Race King. Super excited about this, not just from someone who helped produce it, but from a consumer standpoint. As I travel the country and go to different whiskey bars, I'm always looking for something that's going to catch me by surprise a little bit. And if you're a friend of mine, I've been bragging about Race King for about 6 months. It's going to come out April 14th is going to be the release. And this is a double malt mash bill. So it's corn.
Let's explain that a little bit more. So, because you guys have so many different mash bills, and I feel like there is a great ability for you all to play with different flavor profiles.
Sure. Yep.
There's also an underlying consistency, right? Always toasted.
Yep.
Always charred.
Yep.
Never chill filtered. So you have some of the same things that are consistent through all your brands.
Yep.
But I think let's talk a little bit about, this is a new one, so people are going to be curious.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that mash bill.
So we have corn, we have malted rye, we have rye, and then we have a chocolate malted barley and a chocolate malted wheat. And, you know, I was mentioning when we produce this and we're fermenting it, you walk into our fermentation room and you could smell the chocolate right away. You might think that, man, there's be 40% chocolate malt in there. You know, it's really only 7% total of the chocolate malted grains between the wheat and the rye. So we are super excited the way it's turned out because, you know, I gave you a pour before.
So good.
The chocolate comes out in a very balanced way. You know, you get traditional bourbon notes on the front end, but that bitterness comes in from the dark chocolate. There's a cocoa flavor. You mentioned the citrus that blends very well.
I got a lot of the citrus. And I even said it tastes to me like the first thing that I thought it was like one of those like chocolate oranges, like the chocolate orange slices. Because it just has this beautiful lightness to it, this citrusness to it. But then you're right, you get the bitterness of that dark chocolate. Citrus and chocolate are two things that I love finding in whiskey. I almost never find them together. So I'm very excited about having this.
There's like a lingering, almost like an espresso finish too that I love. And, you know, the reason I bring this up, he's like, this is that pour in that whiskey bar that's going to vary from everything else.
100%.
And, you know, we're not recreating the wheel. We tweaked the mash bill by 7%. And it's amazing how just a small tweak in what grains you're using will yield a completely different product.
But that's part of like what you uncover whenever you're creating different mash bills, right? So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. How did you guys come up with this? Was this something that was intentional where you were like, what happens if we do this?
Yes. A lot of trial and error. Yes.
Okay.
You know, and these different malting houses, that's an unbelievable industry in itself. I mean, there's so much that goes in. Overall quality of whiskey, a lot of it comes into what malting house you're using, these relationships you build. And our distillery team has done a great job working with these malting houses and then bringing samples in. So it really starts with us trying the raw grain and saying, oh, we could really see this pop. But then there's trial and error, you know, and tweaking mash bills and trying new things. And that's where rabbit hole size, you know, I would never call us a craft distillery. It's not like we're producing a barrel a day here.
Right.
But we are small enough where we can try 4 different recipes in a day and not be financially tied if it doesn't work out.
Right.
But we're large enough where we could scale it up if we need to. So I really think in the current industry, the current state of everything, our agility, our flexibility to pivot and try new things is such an advantage for us because we don't have to be stuck making just 1 or 2 mash bills.
Right.
I mean, you can walk in here any given day and we'll have 4 different mash bills fermenting in our fermentation tanks, where a lot of places you go to, they'll run bourbon, the same bourbon mash bill for 10 months and maybe do a rye for a month and then shut down for maintenance for another month, where we see a lot of value in trying different things to see how it works out. They're not all going to be home runs, but thankfully for us, we've definitely have leaned into some products that have worked out very well, and Race King is an example of that for sure.
Because you said this started as one of your founders, correct?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that and how that's an elevated like expression that you guys do and release. And then we'll talk about the decision to kind of bring this into your core lineup because I think it was a great decision based on trying this. So cheers.
Cheers. Absolutely. You know, I'm glad you see the value in it. And you know, I remember this fall, I've been sneaking out sample bottles to my friends and taking them to tailgates and saying, what do you all think about this? Because I want to get perspective. And I think it's such a fun pour because everyone wants to be that master taster like I talked about. Everyone wants to pick out different notes. And this is just such a fun, approachable drink that you can always pick out those cocoa, espresso, chocolate notes and make of it what you will, for sure. The Founders Collection, and this bottle right here, and then the Distillery series have always been a fun playground for us. The 2 differences are a lot of our Founders collections have been with barrels that were acquired before the distillery was open. So how can we take these premium barrels from other distilleries and put a rabbit hole twist on it? And the Amberana is a great example of that. Amberana, people should be no stranger to that. People will have been enjoying this finish for a while. Different distilleries are doing different takes on it. I will say, for those of y'all who don't know, Amberana is a Brazilian hardwood. and it is extremely potent. So I think a lot of distilleries had to learn a hard lesson on this because they're so used to aging a product in their finishing cask for 2 or 3 months.
Yep.
You can't do that with an Amburana. And that's where a diligent eye on your finishing projects really come in handy, where we tried this at the 2-year mark, the 2-week mark, and we realized we need to pull this out right now.
Yeah.
We couldn't let it go another week or two or it would be too much. So Amburana has a beautiful, people call cinnamon toast crunch.
Okay.
I get like a incense, a smell, and it's just a completely different product that you're going to see in most American whiskeys. Starlino is our rye whiskey that we finished in a sweet vermouth cask. So Starlino is almost like a pre-made Manhattan. And, you know, much like Race King, we did it in the smaller 375 milliliter bottle. People got enthusiastic about it. And we actually last year sent a whole pallet over to Sweden because they love American rye whiskey over there. So it's starting to see where does each individual product fit into our overall game plan and see which products gravitates to different parts of the world.
Yeah. Has there ever been one that just really surprised you? Or you guys started on a path and then everybody just wanted more?
Yes.
I mean, it just kept growing. And
For sure.
So do you have a story like that where you were just like, okay.
Well, I think that's where Race King came in mind because you know, when we make Race King, not just the smell of the chocolate, but visually it's a rich brown color in the fermentation tank where you're so used to seeing kind of standard gold, yellow color of the mash. Like right away it popped and then the smell was there. So there was a level of excitement on tasting that distillate, and you could taste that chocolate on the distillate as well. So just the enthusiasm to approach Race King and get into a barrel to pick up those different caramel vanilla tones mixed with the chocolate from the grains. This has been something that we've been incredibly excited about for years that we knew was coming.
And I think it's important to note that like we as the consumer see a 6-year-old bourbon and sometimes it's tough to stop and pause and realize that 6 years ago, someone was working on this project.
For sure. Yes.
And sometimes more than that, right? Because sometimes it takes a while. You got to play with the mash bill. You got to play with the flavor profiles before it even gets into maturation. And then that's something else that you and I were talking about. Maturation is almost unpredictable. You know,
really is.
I think that's something really fun because you all are an urban distillery.
Yeah.
So your rick houses are out in Henry County. So how did that decision come about?
Yeah, you know, I think for one, the compliance side and the legalities of having urban rick houses, you know, just from the fire hazard aspect of it, it's a challenge. And I think when you're looking at maturation and key factors on what produces a really quality whiskey, well, airflow is a big part of that.
Right.
So, you know, being out in the country, we're out in Campbellsburg, Kentucky and Henry County, as you mentioned. These 5 warehouses are all situated in different areas because it will yield different flavor profiles depending on the location of that warehouse. So warehouse B sits up on a hill where it gets blasted by air constantly. That's going to age differently than warehouse A that sits down in a holler a little bit and it's more stagnant there. And, you know, then we have 3 that are lined up all in a row, and all of them have different personalities already to them. So just the flexibility to be able to age without the security risk as well. You know, if you have 200,000 barrels aging in an urban environment, there is a lot of risk there just from people who you don't want in those rick houses trying to get in there. So there's a security component in there, but also room to grow. You know, as things continue, we have plans to add a 6th, 7th rick house where we're not going to be landlocked as much and get ourselves in a pickle. But you know, you hit the nail on the head. Maturation, you do what you can do, but you're still, you kind of hand it over to a different force. You know, there's a magic in there because, you know, this different species of wood, you know, the seasoning time, you know, there's this innately going to be minor differences where you can have whiskey from the exact same lot, barrels that were filled up back to back, sitting right next to each other in a rick house, and when you tap into them, they taste completely different. You know, so I love the magic of that. You know,
same. That's one of my favorite aspects because it's the wild card.
It really is, and people are trying to control the environment more. People are heat cycling. People
Yep.
are doing different tweaks to traditional aging, where I kind of like the Mother Nature aspect of
Yeah.
it, because you never know how one extremely hot season or a cold spell
Right.
in the middle of the spring is going to react with those barrels, and it makes it so much more unique where you can't duplicate that.
Well, and
And I
even
love
down
that.
to the rick houses are changing. You know,
Yes.
there's a lot of different experiments with
sure.
the type and the style of the rick house that
100%.
they're building now.
Yep.
And so it's something that I feel like, for me, again, like as an enthusiast, I love that because, like you said,
Yep.
you can have two barrels sitting right next to each other, built
Yep.
on the same day at the same time,
Yep.
and they're two totally different. It's like
Yes.
kids. You know, you
100%.
never know what's going to happen with
No.
those guys.
Yes, everyone has their own journey. Every barrel
Right.
has its own journey.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun to go in and see that,
For
because
sure.
regardless of the differences that people are starting to make, you know, we sat down with David Mandela at Whiskey House. They're doing a lot of different experiments to try and figure out what the liquid's journey
Yes.
truly looks like.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next few years, I'm sure they'll uncover a lot of different things.
Yeah.
They have little trackers on the barrels and
Exactly. Yeah.
figuring out the temperature fluctuations. But at the end of the day, you're kind of at the mercy.
For sure.
And
No
I
doubt.
think that's something that's really, really cool and unique about our industry,
I think so too.
to not be able to control that aspect.
Love that. And I think so many decisions as far as barrel management
Mhm.
at a certain level of our industry is driven by safety risk, because traditionally barrel warehouses are the most dangerous part of the operation.
Yeah.
And then also there's a financial component on what's the cost of storing per barrel. And that's where you start seeing things like palletized rick houses come into play, where people have different mindsets on palletized versus rick. You know, there's plenty of people I respect that don't see a difference. And me personally, I see a minor difference. But it also gets this thought in my head on, take away the financial component. What is the optimal aging environment for a barrel?
Yeah.
If money wasn't a factor, would it be one barrel sitting there with a 10-foot halo around it so that it gets maximized airflow? You know, if you take away the security component of it, are you better off just having a big roof over barrels with open walls that you get blasted by air constantly? You know, so like going down and approaching maturation with, we don't have to do it the same way as our granddad did and our great granddad did it. There's different components. There's different designs that have been not tapped into, that I'm super curious on who's going to be the ones to try something totally off the wall. You know, when I can't sleep at night and I'm trying to think about different things, I always think about unique rickhouse designs and you know, what would be the optimal way to pull in that airflow? What would be the optimal way to reduce the leaks and corrosion? I mean, that's a big part of what we're doing right now. Ethanol gets trapped in that environment, it starts corroding away at the hoops, and it can lead to lost product. So there's a million different factors in maturation that I'm constantly chewing on to see, okay, what's the next step in this world look like? Because for the first time, we actually have data that will tie into the flavor components of everything. And how can we predict those flavor profiles a little bit better?
Which is fun for me because, you know, obviously vintage whiskey is coming. There's like this massive resurgence of trying different vintage whiskey. And everybody always asks, why does it taste so different? And I'm like, name a factor, and that probably plays a role, right? It could be the water. It could be the barrels that they're using, how old that wood was.
100%.
It could be the environments that it's aging in, the difference in the seasons back then. It could be the production. It could be the fermentation. There's so many components.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes.
You know? And so I love hearing that people are kind of moving forward.
Yeah.
But I am also very curious about, like, what does it look like to go back? Because that whiskey's still great.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see, you know, in 20 years, how something tastes the same way that I see it now.
Yeah.
And what flavors start to adjust as it gets, you know, a little bit farther away from what we're used to having at that time.
Yep. Yep. No, there's definitely, when I taste old, you know, antique whiskey, there's a texture to it that I just love. You know,
the
what I mean?
mouthfeel is just crazy.
It is. And, you know, being a distiller at one point, I can't help to think about what it was like 40, 50 years ago to be a distiller, manually changing knobs. Because I had this iPad where I'm doing everything right there. You know, there was such more of a human component to it back then, where you could taste the difference in distillate depending on which distiller was on shift that day.
Yeah.
Which is incredible to think about. And, I love those kind of heritage stories of where this all started versus where it is now. For
Yeah.
sure.
Want to explore bourbon in a new way? The Parlor Room is an intimate tasting experience in the heart of downtown Bardstown. Here, it isn't just about what's in the glass, it's about the story behind it. From rare pours to thoughtfully curated classes, every seat is designed to take you deeper into bourbon. Book your experience at parlorroomtastings.com.
It's cool to see too. And I love that I'm in this era.
Yeah.
Obviously there's so much out there that no matter what you like, you can find a whiskey that is going to satisfy you.
No doubt about it.
Whether you're new to the scene, whether you just love cocktails, whether you want a high proof that knocks your socks off, there's something out there in every different palette and profile that people can find. And I also love that about Rabbit Hole, because I feel like you all kind of also have that same, tip of the hat, where I feel like there's something in your catalog, no matter what, no matter what level you're at, that you can find something.
Yeah, with portfolio management is a big part of what we work on. And not only do we not want to step on the toes of our existing core products,
right?
We want to make sure we're not stepping on the toes of our cousin brands with Pernod Ricard, so we want to make sure that Rabbit Hole is focusing on different core beliefs than Jefferson's.
Yep.
And Jefferson's is looking at things differently than TX Whiskey or Smooth Ambler. These brands that we work with, they all have unique personalities to them, and we want to make sure that the spotlight is kept on what makes those individual products special instead of competing with one another.
Yeah.
And I think there's a factor when you're, we talked about how serious we took our whiskey in Kentucky. It's been a really cool benefit for me working on brands from West Virginia and Texas, because there's a terroir aspect to it. So, there's it's going to taste differently, obviously, down in Texas, because the environment for aging is so much different.
Right.
And, West Virginia is very similar to Kentucky, but where Smooth Ambler is, it's more on the cusp of the mountains, and there's a whole different environment there.
Yep.
So it's been really neat to see how different states approach American whiskey.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think exploring American whiskey has been something that has been really, really cool for me to find that out as well.
Absolutely.
And hopefully more people can start doing the same thing.
No, I think the more we can get people enthusiastic about the variety, because, people for years are in the Scotch infatuation where you're used to seeing incredibly high age statements. Well, we age so much differently here, where a 20-year-old Scotch could be equivalent to an 8, 9, 10-year-old bourbon, where there's a lot of traditionalists who don't want a bourbon past a certain age statement.
Well, because it's very different, like you said. I mean, the fluctuation of temperature in like Scotland and Ireland is like 20 degrees from winter to summer. Here, I mean, we could get 40 degrees in one day.
That's a Wednesday. That's a random Wednesday.
And that happened last week.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to know the strengths of your industry
100%.
and figure out how to play well with those.
Yes.
And I totally agree with that. I think there's definitely a line. Some places do it very, very well. I've had some 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds that are amazing.
Yep.
And I've had some that I'm just like, that isn't my vibe.
Exactly.
So,
you start getting to a point, if you're not strategic with those older age statements, then it will start to turn on you a little bit.
100%.
And might become more tannic or wood forward, which some people might like, some people won't. But, you hit the nail on the head with the temperature swings, because what they might experience in a season, we experience in a day.
Yeah.
And the more you dive into maturation statistics, the driving factor is not these huge swings from winter to summer.
Right.
It's the micro changes in a single 24-hour period.
Yes.
The more it fluctuates rapidly is where what really drives that growth in the flavor profiles and gets that bourbon seeping into the wood. And that's why places like Kentucky, it's almost like the good Lord said, hey, this is the perfect place to age whiskey, because we get those constantly.
Yep. And I've also seen it from the reverse. I've had 2-year-old whiskey that blew my mind. 4-year-old, 6-year-old. This is amazing. Yeah. I absolutely love what you're doing here and cannot wait to have my own bottle. But I don't think age is just a number by any means, but I think what you do with the time that you have is absolutely what's going to play a factor in how much you like something.
Yeah.
I always ask this question. It's one of my favorites. So what is your favorite memory of where you are, how you got here, what you've done, what you've contributed to? anything like that. And what story do you love that just like really made you who you are?
Yeah, I think trusting myself and where I wanted to go, not so much when I first started at Rabbit Hole, but for me to realize when I was at Wild Turkey and, living in the shadows of Jimmy Russell, basically,
Yeah.
for me to realize that if I'm going to make a career out of this, I don't want to just be telling someone else's story.
Yeah.
I want to seek out that authenticity for myself. And at that time my wife was pregnant. I didn't want to be on the road that much anymore, and I knew Rabbit Hole was coming around the corner, so I would literally go to Please and Thank You, which is a coffee shop in the neighborhood where Kaveh had a temporary office above it, and I would check in every week, and I would just be relentless on wanting to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And those times, those early visits where I'm trying to sell myself and trying to show the value and what I can bring, I cherish those times now, because you realize if you want something, you got to be persistent on that.
Absolutely.
And it makes me feel so fortunate that Kaveh gave me that opportunity, because this place has become more than just a job for me. This is where I got pictures of my kids as babies, peeking into the fermentation tank. And, it's given me an opportunity to be a part of something from the very beginning and to help dictate the path it's going on. So I think anytime those early years, I think back on before we even fermented anything, we wanted to give the tanks a good scrubbing. So just me down with a brush with, playing Motown on my iPhone and just being as happy as I could be, because I knew I was about to embark on this new adventure.
Yeah.
And, you think about where this whiskey is now, and it is a time capsule. It takes me back 6, 7, 8 years ago to when I just went down this road of operations, and it helps me appreciate it more here and be able to tell my story with such an innate passion in it, because I experienced it. And it's something that if you grew up as a kid in Kentucky, you either want to train horses or make whiskey.
Right.
So I really appreciate that I've been able to be a part of this ride with Rabbit Hole and have these memories. And overall, it feels like fate to me that it just worked out the way it should, for sure.
I love that. Well, again, I think that you've done an amazing job.
Thank you so much.
I love being a part of the journey myself, and
Yep.
just trying all of the different, as each time capsule is open, trying where you have been in
Yep.
that journey. And
Yep.
I'm excited about what you're doing now and what's coming next.
Well, thank you for being a friend.
Yeah,
We love that.
absolutely.
I hope you had a good time today, and
Always.
we're always here for you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks, y'all. That's a wrap for my interview with Matt Gandolfo here at Rabbit Hole. When you finish your tour, you're going to end up right here at Overlook. I'm going to go have a cocktail. Make sure you do the same. Cheers.